As you drift off to sleep tonight, we'll tell the story of one of the most fascinating people. If our stories help you relax and fall asleep, please subscribe. It would mean the world to us. And now, as you continue to relax, let's begin. Tonight's story is about Margot Robbie. The camera is not yet rolling, but the light is already there, hovering softly above the set as if it has arrived early, unsure of when it will be needed. A script rests open on a small table, its pages slightly curved at the edges, marked by quiet repetitions of use. Across the room, someone adjusts a lens, turning it gently, testing a focus that hasn't yet found its subject. And near the edge of that light, standing without urgency, is a figure who hasn't quite stepped into the moment yet, as though the role waiting for her is still deciding how it should begin. There is a pause before action, but it doesn't feel empty. It feels like something suspended, something that belongs neither to preparation nor to performance. She glances once at the script, not reading it now, but remembering it, as if the lines have already moved somewhere deeper than words. Around her, movement continues in quiet efficiency, yet she remains still, holding a space that is both hers and not entirely hers at the same time. It is the kind of stillness that suggests familiarity, but also a subtle distance, like someone who has done this many times and yet never in quite the same way. The mirror in the corner reflects a version of her that already belongs to the story being told, but the reflection does not move immediately when she does. It lingers, just slightly, as if considering whether it should follow. Makeup sits carefully arranged beneath the glow, each tool placed with intention, each colour chosen not to transform entirely, but to suggest. She steps closer, not to change anything now, but to look, and in that looking there is something quiet, something that doesn't ask how she appears, but something closer to where she is, just before becoming someone else. Outside the set, the day continues without awareness of this moment. Cars pass, conversations happen, time moves forward without pause. But inside, something slows. The air carries a different weight, one that feels almost deliberate, as though each second is allowed to expand just enough to be noticed. She breathes in, not deeply, not dramatically, just enough to settle into the space that has been created around her. And in that breath, there is a familiarity, not with the scene, but with the act of arriving. It did not begin here, of course. The light, the camera, the script, all of it feels structured, designed, intentional. But somewhere far from this quiet room, there was a different kind of beginning, one that had no audience and no expectation. A place where the idea of being seen was not yet something to consider, and where the rhythm of days followed something simpler, something grounded in the ordinary details of life before performance ever entered the picture. In a quieter part of Australia, long before the presence of cameras or scripts, the days carried a different kind of clarity. The air felt open, uncontained, stretching across landscapes that did not ask to be observed, only lived in. There were routines then, but they were not rehearsed. They simply happened. School mornings, familiar paths, the sound of conversation that did not need to be remembered because it was never meant to be recorded. And somewhere within those ordinary moments, something small and unspoken began to take shape. It wasn't ambition in any defined sense, not something that could be named clearly at the time. It was closer to curiosity, but even that word feels too direct. It was a quiet noticing, perhaps, a sense that moments could be held differently, that expressions could shift, that stories existed not only in books or on screens, but in the way people moved, spoke, paused. She would watch, not in a way that stood apart, but in a way that blended observation with participation, as if both were happening at once. There were early attempts, small and unremarkable from the outside. School performances, brief roles, moments that came and went without much attention beyond the immediate circle around them. But within those moments, something began to settle. Not certainty, not yet, but a kind of recognition, not of where things would go, but of where they might continue. It was not about becoming someone else entirely, but about understanding how easily one could shift, how natural it could feel to step slightly outside of oneself and then return again. The days remained grounded, filled with the same rhythms as before. There were responsibilities, expectations, things that had nothing to do with performance or storytelling. And yet, beneath all of that, something continued quietly, like a thread that did not demand attention, but remained present. It did not interrupt life. It moved alongside it, weaving through moments without needing to be acknowledged directly. Back on the set, the light has shifted slightly, adjusted to match the scene that will soon begin. Someone calls out a minor change, and the room responds without disruption. She moves now, not quickly, but with a kind of awareness that suggests the moment has arrived, or at least is close enough to step toward. The script is no longer on the table. It's in her hands now, though she doesn't look at it. Her fingers rest along the edge of the page as if feeling its presence rather than reading its contents. There is something about this transition that feels almost invisible, the way preparation dissolves into performance without a clear boundary between the two. One moment she's standing within the quiet of the room, and the next she is stepping into something that requires a different kind of attention. But even then, it is not a sudden change. It is gradual, like the way light shifts at the end of a day. Not abrupt, but inevitable. The camera is ready now, though it hasn't begun recording. The space between readiness and action feels delicate, like something that could be disturbed if handled too roughly. She stands within that space, not filling it, not trying to define it, but allowing it to exist. And in that allowance, there is something that feels practiced, not rehearsed in the traditional sense, but experienced, understood without needing to be explained. It's easy to imagine that moments like this are driven by precision, by technique, by an exact understanding of what needs to be done, and to some extent that is true. But there is also something else, something quieter and less defined, something that doesn't belong entirely to preparation or to performance, but exists somewhere in between, guiding the transition without ever becoming fully visible. Her early steps into larger roles did not arrive all at once. They came gradually, through opportunities that required movement, literal movement from one place to another, from familiar environments into spaces that carried different expectations. Each step forward brought with it a subtle shift, not only in how she was seen, but in how she needed to see herself within those new contexts. There were moments of uncertainty, though they rarely presented themselves outwardly. Instead, they existed in small pauses, in the spaces between action and reflection. A line delivered one way, then reconsidered. A scene completed, then quietly revisited in thought later. These were not moments of doubt in the dramatic sense, but moments of adjustment, of alignment, as though something was always being fine-tuned just beneath the surface. Recognition, when it began to arrive, did not change everything immediately. It settled slowly, like a presence that grows over time rather than appearing all at once. People began to notice, to speak her name in contexts that carried more weight than before. But within that growing awareness there remained a continuity, a connection to the earlier moments that had no audience, no expectation, no need to be anything other than what they were. Back on the set, the director gives a small nod. It is not a signal filled with urgency, but one that acknowledges readiness. The camera begins to move, quietly, almost imperceptibly at first, and as it does, something shifts. Not dramatically, not in a way that announces itself, but in a way that feels like a continuation rather than a beginning. She steps forward, not into the spotlight, but into the moment that has been waiting. And as she does, the space around her seems to adjust, as if recognizing that something has changed, even if it cannot fully describe what that change is. The role is no longer waiting. It has begun, though not with a clear line, not with a defined boundary, but with a quiet merging of presence and performance. And somewhere within that merging there remains a question, not spoken, not defined, but present in the way she moves, the way she pauses, the way she exists both within the role and just slightly outside of it. A question that does not demand an answer, but continues to shape the moment nonetheless. The scene unfolds without announcement, as if it had already been in motion long before the camera chose to observe it. A door opens within the set, its hinge releasing a soft, measured sound, and she steps through it with a presence that feels both deliberate and unforced. The character she carries now is not introduced. It simply appears, settling into her posture, her voice, the way her gaze rests on objects as though they hold meaning beyond their surface. And yet, beneath that presence, there remains something unchanged, something that does not belong to the role, but travels with her quietly from one moment to the next. The lines come gently, not performed with emphasis, but placed carefully into the space between breaths. She does not rush them, nor does she linger too long, as if the rhythm has already been decided somewhere beyond conscious thought. Around her, the set responds, the other actors, the subtle shifts of light, the quiet movements of the crew just outside the frame. Everything aligns, not perfectly but naturally, like a pattern that forms without needing to be forced. And within that alignment, the moment begins to feel complete, even as it continues to unfold. When the director calls cut, the word lands softly, almost as if it hesitates before breaking the continuity that has just been created. The room exhales in a quiet, collective release. She does not move immediately. For a brief second, she remains where the character has left her, as though allowing the transition back to herself to happen at its own pace. It is a subtle moment, easy to overlook, but it carries a weight that lingers just beneath the surface. She steps away from the scene slowly, her expression neutral, not because nothing has happened, but because something has finished. The script is returned to her hands, though it feels different now, less like a guide, more like a memory of something that has already passed. She flips through a few pages without reading them fully, her eyes tracing lines she already knows, not searching for information, but perhaps for a feeling that matches what has just occurred. In the quiet space just outside the set, there is a chair positioned near a small table, its surface holding a glass of water that has been untouched. She sits, not out of fatigue, but out of habit, as if this pause is as much a part of the process as the performance itself. The glass reflects the light in a way that distorts its edges, turning something simple into something slightly unfamiliar. She notices it briefly, then looks away, her attention shifting inward, though nothing about her posture suggests withdrawal. It is in moments like these that the distance between roles becomes more noticeable. Not a distance that separates entirely, but one that allows space for something else to exist. She does not rush to fill that space. Instead, she lets it remain, open and undefined, as if it holds something that cannot be named directly. And in that openness, there is a quiet continuity, a thread that connects one role to the next, one moment to another, without ever needing to be fully seen. The journey that brought her here did not move in a straight line. There were early roles that required adaptation, environments that demanded a different kind of awareness. Moving from Australia to larger, more demanding spaces meant stepping into worlds that operated on a different scale. The familiarity of earlier experiences gave way to something broader, something that required not just participation, but presence in a way that could not be ignored. Those first transitions were not marked by sudden transformation, but by gradual adjustment. Auditions that carried more weight, rooms that felt slightly less forgiving, expectations that were not always spoken but clearly understood. She entered those spaces not with certainty, but with a quiet determination, allowing herself to learn not through instruction, but through observation, repetition, and a steady refinement of something that had begun long before it was recognized. There were roles that passed without lasting attention, moments that existed briefly before dissolving into the larger flow of work. But each of those moments left something behind, not always visible, not always measurable, but present nonetheless. It was not about accumulation in the traditional sense, but about layering, about the subtle building of experience that does not announce itself, but reveals itself over time. Back on set, another scene is prepared. The lighting changes again, softer this time, creating shadows that move gently across the surfaces of the room. She stands once more in position, though the character she carries now is different. The shift is not dramatic, but it is precise, as though something has been adjusted internally rather than externally. Her posture changes slightly, her movements take on a different rhythm, and once again, she steps into something that is both constructed and deeply felt. The camera begins to follow her, not leading, not directing, but observing. It captures the small details, the way her hand lingers on a doorframe, the pause before she speaks, the glance that holds just a fraction longer than expected. These are not exaggerated choices. They are subtle, almost imperceptible, but they shape the moment in ways that cannot be reduced to technique alone. As the scene continues, there is a sense of immersion that feels complete, yet never overwhelming. She does not disappear into the role entirely, nor does she remain separate from it. Instead, there is a balance, a quiet coexistence that allows both to exist at the same time. And within that balance, there is something that feels consistent, not fixed, but reliable in its presence. The rise in recognition came not from a single moment, but from a series of performances that gradually drew attention. Each role added something new, not in terms of scale alone, but in depth, in variation, in the ability to move between different expressions of identity without losing the thread that connected them. The industry began to notice, not just the performances, but the consistency beneath them, the sense that something was being carried from one role to another, even as each remained distinct. Her breakthrough did not feel like an arrival, but like a shift in perspective. The roles became larger, the expectations more pronounced, but the process remained rooted in something familiar. She continued to approach each character not as something to be mastered, but as something to be understood slowly, patiently, through attention rather than force. There were moments of visibility that extended beyond the screen, interviews, public appearances, images that circulated widely, each one presenting a version of her that was both real and constructed. Navigating those spaces required a different kind of awareness, one that was not grounded in performance, but in presence. And within that visibility there remained a question, not about how she was seen, but about what remained unchanged beneath that shifting surface. After the scene ends, she returns once again to the quiet space outside the frame. The chair is still there, the glass of water now slightly warmer, the light no longer as sharp as before. She sits again, not because she needs to, but because the pause feels necessary, as though each moment of stillness allows something to settle before the next begins. There is no urgency in her movements, no attempt to rush from one state to another. Instead, there is a continuity, a steady progression that does not demand attention, but holds it nonetheless. She looks at her hands briefly, not examining them, but noticing them, as if they carry something from the roles she has just stepped out of. The set continues around her, preparing for what comes next. Voices remain low, movements precise, everything operating within a rhythm that has been established over time, and within that rhythm she remains present, not detached, not fully immersed, but balanced somewhere in between. It is in this balance that something becomes clear, not in a way that can be stated directly, but in a way that can be felt, a sense that the roles, the recognition, the movement between different versions of self all exist within a larger continuity that does not depend on any single moment to define it. And as she stands again, ready to return to the set, there is no visible shift, no clear indication that anything has changed. But something has, quietly, subtly, in a way that does not announce itself, but remains present nonetheless, shaping the next moment before it even begins. The next scene is quieter, almost restrained, as if the set itself has decided to lower its voice. Curtains are drawn halfway, allowing only a measured amount of light to enter, and the room takes on a softer tone, one that feels more internal than external. She stands near a window, her reflection faint against the glass, layered over the outside world that continues without awareness of this moment. For a second, it is unclear which image belongs to her, the one inside the room or the one drifting faintly across the surface of the window. The camera remains still this time, observing rather than following, as if movement might disturb something fragile. She doesn't speak immediately. Instead, she rests her hand lightly against the frame, her fingers tracing its edge in a way that feels unplanned, yet precise. The gesture doesn't call attention to itself, but it holds something that suggests the character she carries is not entirely comfortable within the boundaries of the scene. And yet, she remains there, allowing that tension to exist without resolving it. When she finally speaks, the words come softer than before, not because they are uncertain, but because they do not need to reach beyond the space they occupy. The voice is steady, but there is a slight pause between phrases, as if each thought is being placed carefully, not for effect, but for alignment. Around her, the stillness deepens. Even the smallest sounds, the shift of fabric, the faint hum of equipment, seem to step back, giving the moment room to breathe. It is this kind of scene that reveals something quieter about her process. Not the visible transformation, not the external performance, but the way she holds space within a role. She does not fill every moment. She allows absence to exist, allows silence to carry weight without trying to shape it into something more. And in that restraint, there is a kind of control, not rigid, not forced, but steady and deliberate. The journey into roles like this did not come from sudden instinct. It was shaped over time, through repetition that did not feel repetitive, through attention that remained consistent even as circumstances changed. Early on, there were moments where everything felt more immediate, where the focus was on reaching the next step, securing the next opportunity, proving something that had not yet been fully seen. But as those steps accumulated, something shifted. The urgency softened. Not entirely, but enough to allow for a different kind of approach. The work became less about movement and more about depth, less about reaching outward, and more about understanding what already existed within the moment. She began to return to scenes not just to complete them, but to sit within them, to notice where they resisted, where they aligned, where something subtle did not quite settle. On set, another take is called. This time, the adjustment is minimal, just a slight change in timing, a shift in where the gaze lands at a particular line. She nods, not because the instruction is complex, but because it connects to something she already understands. When the camera begins again, the difference is almost invisible, but it is there. The rhythm changes slightly. The pause deepens just enough, and the moment feels more complete, though nothing obvious has been added. Between takes, she steps back again, but not far. There is no need to leave the space entirely. Instead, she lingers at its edge, where the scene still echoes faintly, where the character has not fully receded. Her expression remains neutral, but not empty. It holds something that does not need to be displayed, but remains present in the way she stands, the way she breathes, the way she allows time to pass without interruption. As her career expanded, these quiet adjustments became more central to her work. The larger the roles, the more visible the performances, the more important it became to maintain something steady beneath it all. Not a fixed identity, but a point of return, a place that did not shift with each new character, each new expectation. It was not something she spoke about directly, but it shaped the way she moved through each project, each collaboration, each moment in front of the camera. There were roles that demanded intensity, characters that required a level of presence that could easily overwhelm the space around them. In those moments, it would have been easy to push further, to amplify, to make each expression more pronounced. But instead, she often moved in the opposite direction, finding stillness within an intensity, allowing moments to unfold without forcing them into clarity too quickly. This approach did not always draw immediate attention. It was subtle, sometimes even overlooked in favour of more obvious expressions of performance. But over time, it created something distinct, a consistency that did not rely on repetition, but on a quiet understanding of how much to give and how much to hold back. The recognition that followed was not just about the roles themselves, but about the way she inhabited them. There was a sense that something remained constant, even as the characters changed. Not visible in a direct way, but felt in the continuity between performances, a presence that did not disappear entirely, even when it was meant to. After the scene concludes, the set begins to shift again. Equipment is moved, lights are adjusted, the space transforms into something new. She steps away, this time walking a little further, toward a trailer positioned just outside the main set. The door closes softly behind her, and for a moment, the noise of the outside world fades into a distant hum. Inside, the space is simple. A chair, a mirror, a small table with scattered items that suggest both routine and impermanence. She sits, not immediately looking at the mirror, but at the space around her, as if noticing it again for the first time. The quiet here is different. Not shared, not part of a larger rhythm, but contained, personal. Eventually, her gaze shifts to the mirror. The reflection looks back without interruption, without delay. There is no character now, no scene to hold on to. Just the image of someone between moments, between roles, between expectations. She does not adjust anything, does not reach for the makeup that rests nearby. Instead, she simply looks, as if waiting for something to settle into place. But nothing announces itself. There is no clear transition, no visible return to something that can be easily named. Instead, there is a gradual easing, a soft movement from one state to another that does not draw attention to itself. And in that movement, there is something familiar. Not because it repeats exactly, but because it follows a rhythm that has been shaped over time. Outside, the set continues to prepare for the next scene. Inside, she remains seated for a moment longer, not delaying, not hesitating, but allowing the pause to complete itself. Her hands rest lightly in her lap, still, unoccupied, as if they are holding something that cannot be seen directly. When she stands again, it is without urgency. The next scene will begin soon, the process will continue, the rhythm will carry forward. But for now, there is just this moment, the quiet space between roles, between versions of self, where something remains undefined, yet unmistakably present. And as she opens the door and steps back into the structured world of the set, that quiet presence moves with her, unchanged, unspoken, shaping the next moment in ways that do not need to be explained. The next sequence begins in a larger space, one that feels less contained, where the edges of the set stretch further and the light is brighter, more exposed. Crew members move with slightly quicker steps, their voices still low but carrying a sharper clarity, as if the scale of the scene requires a different kind of precision. She stands near the centre, already in position, though nothing has been called yet. Around her, marks are adjusted on the floor, lenses are swapped, and a quiet coordination takes place that suggests something more demanding is about to unfold. There is a different energy here, not louder, but more expansive, as though the scene requires a presence that reaches further without losing control. She glances briefly toward the camera, not searching for it, but acknowledging its position, the way one might notice a horizon before stepping forward. In her hand, a small prop rests lightly, held without tension, though it carries meaning within the scene. She turns it once, almost absent-mindedly, then stills, letting the moment settle again. The call comes, not abrupt, but firm enough to gather everything into alignment. Action does not feel like a beginning. It feels like a continuation of something already in motion. She moves forward, her steps measured, her expression shifting not in a dramatic way, but in small controlled adjustments that reshape the space around her. The character she inhabits here carries more weight, more visibility, yet she does not push into it. Instead, she allows it to expand naturally, filling the frame without forcing it. This phase of her work, where roles became larger, more defined in the public eye, did not arrive as a sudden transformation. It grew gradually, through performances that began to carry wider attention, through moments that lingered longer in the minds of audiences. The breakthrough was not a single point, but a series of recognitions that slowly aligned, each one adding to the sense that something had shifted. There were scenes that demanded intensity, where the emotional tone carried a sharper edge, where the pace of the moment left little room for hesitation. In those scenes, her presence did not become louder, but more focused. She narrowed her attention, allowing the complexity of the character to settle into smaller, more precise movements. A glance held just a second longer, a pause that arrived exactly where it needed to, a line delivered with a weight that felt both controlled and unforced. Between takes, the space around her adjusted constantly. Assistants stepped in, offering small corrections, repositioning details that would barely register on screen but mattered in the moment. She responded without resistance, not because the changes were necessary in themselves, but because they belonged to the rhythm of the process. Each adjustment, no matter how small, became part of the larger continuity that shaped the scene. As the recognition expanded, so did the expectations. There were more eyes now, more attention directed toward each performance, each decision. Interviews followed, conversations that attempted to define what she did, how she did it, what it meant. She answered carefully, not withholding, but not over-explaining either. There was an understanding that some things could not be fully translated into words without losing something essential. On set, another take begins. This time, the camera moves with her, tracking each step, each shift in posture. The coordination is precise, but it does not feel rigid. Instead, it feels like a quiet collaboration between movement and observation, where each element responds to the other without overt direction. She does not lead the camera, nor does she follow it. They move together, aligned without needing to announce that alignment. In the midst of this, there is a moment, small, almost imperceptible, where her expression softens, just slightly, before returning to the character's focus. It is not an error, not a break in performance, but something else, something that suggests a layer beneath the role, a presence that exists alongside it, not interfering, but never entirely absent. Her breakthrough performances brought her into a space where visibility became constant. Red carpets, public appearances, images that circulated widely, each one presenting a version of her that was both constructed and real. Navigating that space required a different kind of balance, one that did not rely on the structure of a script or the guidance of a director. It required an awareness of how to exist within a moment that was both observed and interpreted simultaneously. She approached these moments with the same quiet consistency she brought to her work. There was no sudden shift into a different persona, no exaggerated attempt to match expectations. Instead, there was a continuation, a steady presence that did not change drastically, even as the context around it did. This consistency did not draw attention to itself, but it allowed her to move through those spaces without becoming entirely defined by them. Back on set, the scene reaches its conclusion. The final line is delivered with a softness that contrasts with the intensity that preceded it. The camera lingers for a moment longer than expected, capturing the stillness that follows, the way her expression holds just long enough to suggest something unresolved. Then the call comes again, and the moment dissolves. She steps back, not immediately leaving the space, but allowing the scene to settle around her. The crew begins to shift, preparing for the next sequence, but she remains still for a second, as if listening to something that has not fully faded yet. Her gaze moves across the set, not searching for anything specific, but taking in the details that have shaped the moment just completed. There is a quiet understanding in the way she moves now, a familiarity not just with the process, but with the transitions within it, the movement from intensity to stillness, from performance to pause, from visibility to quiet reflection. These shifts no longer require effort. They happen naturally, guided by something that has been built gradually over time. As her career continued, she began to take on roles that extended beyond performance. The desire to shape stories from a different position emerged, not as a departure from acting, but as an extension of it. Producing became a way to engage with narratives before they reached the stage of performance, to influence the structure, the tone, the direction, in ways that were not visible on screen but deeply present within it. This transition did not replace her work as an actress. Instead, it added another layer, another dimension to the way she interacted with stories. It allowed her to step back, to observe the process from a wider perspective, to understand how each element contributed to the whole, and within that broader view, there was a continuation of the same quiet question that had always been present, guiding her choices without ever being fully defined. Later, in the privacy of her trailer, the mirror reflects a familiar image once again. The makeup has been adjusted, the costume slightly altered, but the core remains unchanged. She looks at her reflection, not searching for confirmation, but noticing the subtle differences that come and go with each role, each moment. Her hand lifts briefly, not to change anything, but to trace the outline of her own reflection, as if acknowledging its presence without needing to hold on to it. The gesture is small, almost unintentional, but it carries a quiet awareness, a recognition of the space between what is seen and what remains beneath it. Outside, the light begins to shift again, signalling the approach of another scene, another moment to step into. She stands not quickly, but with the same steady rhythm that has carried her through each transition. The door opens, the sound soft and familiar, and she steps back into the structured world that awaits her. And as she does, nothing feels entirely new, yet nothing feels entirely repeated. Each moment carries something forward, something that does not need to be named, but continues to shape the way she moves, the way she pauses, the way she exists within the space between roles. The set is quieter again when she returns, as though the space itself has chosen to slow down after the intensity that came before. The lights are dimmed slightly, their brightness softened into something more diffused, and the shadows stretch longer across the floor. A new scene is being prepared, one that requires less movement, less visible urgency. She steps into place without being called, as if she already understands where the moment will begin. A chair is positioned at the centre, simple and unadorned, facing slightly away from the camera. She sits, her posture relaxed but not casual, her hands resting lightly against her knees. There is no immediate action, no line waiting to be spoken. Instead, the scene begins with stillness, a kind of stillness that does not feel empty, but full of something quiet and unresolved. The camera moves closer, slowly, carefully, as if approaching something that might shift if disturbed. Her gaze settles on a point just beyond the frame, not fixed, but steady enough to suggest attention. It is not clear what she's looking at, and perhaps it does not matter. What matters is the way she holds that gaze, the way it carries a presence that feels both within the scene and slightly removed from it. The line between observation and participation becomes less defined here. as if the role she carries is not asking to be performed but simply to exist. There is a subtle change in her expression, not dramatic, not even immediately noticeable. A small shift in the tension around her eyes, a softening at the corners of her mouth. It is the kind of change that might go unseen if not for the stillness surrounding it. And yet, within that small adjustment something moves. A thought, perhaps, or a feeling that does not fully surface but leaves a trace. This kind of moment, where very little appears to happen, has become central to the way she approaches her work. It is not about filling the space with action, but about allowing the space to reveal something on its own. The discipline required for this is not visible in the traditional sense. It does not announce itself through technique or effort. Instead, it exists in restraint, in the ability to remain present without forcing the moment into clarity. As her work expanded into producing, this understanding deepened. She began to engage with stories not only from within the frame, but from outside it, shaping the conditions in which those quiet moments could exist. It was not about control in the rigid sense, but about creating space for nuance, for subtlety, for the kind of storytelling that does not rely on immediacy to be felt. On set, the director watches closely, saying very little. There is an understanding that the scene does not need to be pushed. It needs to be allowed. She remains still, her breathing even, her presence steady. The camera lingers, capturing the small variations that occur within that stillness. The slight movement of her fingers, the shift of light across her face, the way her gaze changes without fully moving. There is something about this kind of performance that resists explanation. It does not fit easily into descriptions of method or technique. It is closer to observation than execution, closer to listening than speaking, and within that approach, there is a continuity, a thread that runs through her work, connecting moments that might otherwise seem unrelated. Beyond the set, the public image continues to evolve. Interviews frame her in different ways. Narratives are built around her work, her choices, her presence in the industry. These narratives attempt to define, to create a clear understanding of who she is within the larger context of her career. But within those definitions, there is always something that remains just out of reach, something that does not settle into a single explanation. She navigates this space with the same quiet consistency she brings to her roles. There is no visible resistance, no effort to contradict what is said or assumed. Instead, there is a subtle distance, a sense that what is seen publicly is only one layer, one version among many. And beneath that layer, something remains unchanged, though it is not easily described. The scene on set comes to an end not with a clear resolution, but with a gradual fading of movement. The camera pulls back slightly, the light shifts again, and the moment dissolves without a definitive conclusion. She remains seated for a second longer, as if allowing the absence of action to complete itself before she moves. When she stands, it is with the same measured pace that has defined her transitions throughout the day. There is no rush, no sudden shift back into something else. Instead, there is a continuation, a quiet movement from one state into another that does not require acknowledgement. Later, in the quiet of a different space, far from the immediate presence of the set, the atmosphere changes again. There are no cameras here, no structured moments waiting to be captured. The light is natural, softer, less controlled. She sits near a window, the outside world visible but distant, its details blurred by the glass. Her hands rest in her lap once more, still and unoccupied. There is nothing to prepare, nothing to perform. The silence here is different, not shared, not part of a larger rhythm, but personal. It does not ask anything of her. It simply exists, allowing space for something that does not need to be named. She looks out for a moment, not searching for anything specific, but allowing her gaze to settle wherever it does. The world beyond the window continues without interruption, unaware of this quiet pause. And within that contrast, there is something grounding, a reminder of a rhythm that exists outside of performance, outside of recognition. This is where the balance becomes most visible, not in the moments of action, but in the moments that follow. The ability to move between visibility and quiet, between being seen and simply existing. It is not a balance that is achieved once and maintained easily. It is something that is adjusted continuously, shaped by each experience, each role, each transition. As evening begins to approach, the light changes again, casting longer shadows across the room. She remains where she is, not because she needs to, but because the moment feels complete in its stillness. There is no urgency to move forward, no need to define what comes next, and in that stillness there is a sense of continuity, not tied to any single role or moment, but to something that exists beneath them all. Something that has been present from the beginning, though never fully revealed. Something that continues, quietly, shaping each step without needing to be understood completely. When she eventually stands, it is not to leave something behind, but to carry it forward in a way that does not change its nature. The next scene, the next role, the next moment will come, and with it, the same quiet question will remain, unspoken, unresolved, yet always present in the way she moves through the space between who she is and who she appears to be. The next morning begins before the set is fully awake, when the air still carries that early quiet that hasn't yet been shaped by voices or movement. The studio lights are off, but faint daylight slips in through high windows, soft and colourless, touching only the edges of the room. A script lies closed this time, placed neatly on a table, as though whatever it held has already been absorbed. She arrives without announcement, stepping into the space with a familiarity that does not depend on repetition, but on recognition of the place, of the rhythm, of the quiet that comes before everything begins again. There is no immediate preparation. No one calls her into position. No adjustments are made. She moves slowly through the set, her footsteps almost blending into the stillness, as if she's not entering a workspace, but revisiting something that continues whether she's there or not. The chair from yesterday remains, slightly shifted, its position altered just enough to suggest time has passed. She pauses beside it, her hand resting lightly on its back, not to move it, but to feel its presence, as though it holds something left behind from the scene before. In moments like this, the boundary between the role and the person becomes less visible, not because it disappears, but because it no longer needs to be clearly defined. She does not step into character immediately, nor does she remain entirely outside of it. Instead, there is a gradual merging, a quiet alignment that happens without effort. The gestures are small, the way she sits, the way her gaze settles, the way her breathing adjusts slightly as if responding to something unspoken. The crew begins to arrive, their presence gentle at first, almost careful not to disturb the quiet that still lingers. Equipment is set up, lights are tested, voices begin to fill the space in low tones. She remains where she is, not isolated, but not fully engaged either. It is a space she has learned to hold, where everything happens around her, yet something within remains undisturbed, steady, unchanged. As her involvement behind the camera deepened, this awareness extended beyond her own performance. She began to notice the way each part of the process carried its own rhythm, the timing of adjustments, the flow of communication, the subtle coordination that allowed everything to function without interruption. Producing became less about control and more about observation, about understanding how to create conditions where moments like these could unfold naturally. There is a particular kind of attention required for this, not the kind that focuses sharply on a single point, but the kind that remains open, receptive, aware of multiple layers at once. She does not intervene unless something calls for it. Instead, she watches, listens, allows the process to move, trusting that the structure in place will guide what needs to happen. And when she does step in, it is with a clarity that does not disrupt, but aligns. The first scene of the day begins quietly. No dramatic opening, no immediate action, just a continuation of the tone that has already been established. She stands in position, the camera placed slightly further away this time, observing from a distance that allows more space around her. The light is softer, less defined, creating an atmosphere that feels less constructed, more natural. Her movements follow that tone. Nothing is exaggerated, nothing pushed beyond what is needed. She allows the character to exist within the space without trying to shape it too tightly. The lines come, but they are secondary to the presence they emerge from. It is not about what is said, but about how the moment holds itself together around those words. This approach has become more apparent over time, not something she speaks about often, but something that reveals itself in the work. A shift from doing to allowing, from controlling to understanding. It does not mean there is less effort. It means the effort has changed direction, moving inward rather than outward, focusing on alignment rather than execution. The recognition that surrounds her now is constant, but it does not seem to alter this internal process. Public attention continues. Stories are told about her work, her choices, her presence within the industry. These narratives form around her, sometimes aligning with reality, sometimes simplifying it. But within all of that, there remains something that does not fully translate into those descriptions. It is visible in moments like this, where nothing needs to be explained, where the presence she carries is not defined by what is seen externally, but by something quieter, something that exists beneath the surface. It is not something she presents. It is something that remains, regardless of how it is interpreted. The scene concludes without emphasis. No dramatic ending, no clear resolution. The camera simply stops, the light shifts slightly, and the moment fades into the next. She steps out of position, not with a sense of completion, but with the understanding that nothing truly ends here. Each moment flows into the next, carrying something forward that does not need to be acknowledged directly. Later, in a more private space, the noise of the set becomes distant again. The room is simple, unchanged, its familiarity offering a kind of stillness that feels separate from everything else. She sits once more, her reflection in the mirror steady, unaltered by the roles that have passed through it. There is no need to adjust anything now, no preparation, no transition, just a quiet presence, a moment that exists without expectation. She looks at her reflection, not searching for a difference, but noticing the absence of one. The features remain the same, the expression neutral, yet there is something within that cannot be captured by the mirror. It is in these moments that the continuity becomes most apparent. Not in the visible changes, not in the performances that define her publicly, but in the subtle thread that runs beneath them all. A presence that does not shift with each role, but remains steady, even as everything around it evolves. The day continues, scenes unfold, roles are inhabited and released. But beneath all of that, something remains constant, not fixed, not rigid, but consistent in a way that does not require explanation. It is not something that can be pointed to directly. It is something that can only be felt in the quiet spaces between moments, in the pauses that carry more than the actions themselves. And as the light fades once more and the set begins to empty, that quiet presence does not leave with the rest. It remains, subtle and unspoken, continuing to shape each step, each pause, each moment that follows. The final stretch of the day settles in quietly, without the sense of closure that might usually accompany it. The set is still active, but the movements have slowed, softened, as if everyone present understands that something is nearing its natural pause. The lights remain on, though their brightness feels less intense now, diffused by the long hours they have already witnessed. She stands just outside the frame of the next scene, not yet called, not preparing in any visible way, simply present within the space that continues to shift around her. A costume hangs nearby, carefully arranged, waiting to be worn again, or perhaps not needed at all. She reaches out briefly, adjusting the fabric where it has folded slightly, her fingers moving with a familiarity that suggests this gesture has been repeated many times before. There is no urgency in it, no sense that it must be done, only a quiet instinct to bring something back into alignment. When she steps back, the change is barely noticeable, yet it feels complete in a way that does not require acknowledgement. The final scenes of the day are simpler, less layered in their construction. They do not demand intensity or expansion, only presence. She steps into position once more, her posture steady, her gaze settled. The camera captures her from a distance, allowing space to exist around her, allowing the moment to unfold without being contained too tightly. There is something about this distance that reveals more rather than less, as though the absence of closeness allows a different kind of clarity to emerge. Her movements are minimal now, reduced to what is necessary and nothing more. A step forward, a slight turn of the head, a line delivered with a softness that does not seek emphasis. The scene carries a quiet weight, not because of what happens, but because of what remains unspoken within it, and she allows that weight to exist without trying to resolve it, without guiding it toward a clear conclusion. When the final cut is called, it does not feel like an ending. It feels like a pause, one that will extend beyond the boundaries of this set, beyond the structure of this day. The crew begins to pack away equipment, their movements steady, practiced, familiar. She remains where she is for a moment longer, not because she needs to, but because the space still holds something that is not fully settled. Eventually she steps away, moving toward the quieter areas where the presence of the set fades into something more neutral. The transition is subtle, as it has been throughout the day, not marked by any clear shift, but felt in the way the atmosphere changes. The structured rhythm of the set gives way to something less defined, something that does not ask for participation, only awareness. In the privacy of her trailer, the mirror reflects her once again, unchanged in its surface, yet different in what it holds. The layers of the day remain, though they are not visible in a direct way. They exist in small details, the way her shoulders settle, the way her gaze lingers just slightly longer, the way her hands come to rest without seeking anything to hold. She sits, allowing the quiet to return fully. There is no script now, no scene waiting to begin, no role to step into, just the space that exists when everything else has paused. It is not empty, though it might appear that way from the outside. It carries something subtle, something that does not need to be named to be felt. Her thoughts do not move quickly here. They drift, not towards specific moments, but through them, touching lightly without staying too long. The scenes of the day do not replay in full, but fragments remain, gestures, lines, small details that linger just beneath the surface. And within those fragments, there is a sense of continuity, a thread that connects them without needing to be followed to its end. The work she has done, the roles she has carried, the presence she has maintained, none of it feels separate in this moment. It exists together, layered, not in a way that creates complexity, but in a way that forms something whole. And within that whole, there is still space for something that does not belong entirely to any of it. Outside, the light has faded almost completely, leaving only the soft glow of the remaining fixtures. The set is nearly empty now, its earlier activity reduced to a quiet stillness that mirrors the beginning of the day. She remains seated, not waiting, not delaying, simply existing within the pause that has formed around her. There is a subtle shift as she stands, not signalling an end, but acknowledging that the moment has reached its natural point of continuation. The door opens. The sound familiar, unchanged, and she steps out into the dimly lit space beyond. There is no audience here, no expectation, no structure guiding what comes next. And yet, something remains. It is not tied to the roles she has played, nor to the recognition that surrounds her. It is not defined by the moments that have been captured, nor by those that have passed unnoticed. It exists quietly, consistently, moving with her from one space to another, from one day to the next. As she walks away from the set, the distance grows, but the connection does not break. The space behind her fades into the background, its details becoming less distinct, yet the presence it held continues forward, carried without effort. There is no final statement, no conclusion that gathers everything into a clear understanding. Instead, there is only this, a continuation, a quiet movement into whatever comes next, guided by something that has never needed to be fully explained. And in that quiet continuation, the question remains, not as something to be answered, but as something that simply stays, shaping each step, each pause, each moment that follows. The next space is not a set at all, but it carries a similar stillness, as though the rhythm of the day has followed her beyond the boundaries of the studio. The room is simple, its details unremarkable at first glance. A table near a window, a chair angled slightly away, a quiet arrangement of objects that do not demand attention. Outside, the world continues in its usual motion, but here the pace feels softened, as if time has been allowed to settle into something less structured. She moves through the room without urgency, her steps unmeasured, no longer guided by marks on a floor or cues from a voice behind the camera. The absence of those structures does not create uncertainty. Instead, it reveals a different kind of presence, one that does not rely on direction, but on a quiet awareness of the space itself. She pauses near the window, her hand resting lightly against the glass, not to look out, but to feel the separation between inside and outside. The reflection that meets her there is faint, less defined than the mirrors on set, less controlled. It shifts with the light, blending with the shapes beyond it, making it difficult to distinguish where one ends and the other begins. She watches it for a moment, not searching for clarity, but allowing the indistinct edges to remain as they are. There is something in that lack of definition that feels closer to what cannot be fully seen when everything is too sharply lit. In the absence of a role, of a scene, of a script, there is no immediate need to become anything, and yet the presence she carries does not disappear. It remains quiet and steady, shaped by everything that has come before but not confined to it. The gestures are simpler now, the way she sits, the way her gaze moves through the room, the way her breathing settles into a rhythm that does not need to match anything beyond itself. The journey through performance, through recognition, through the many layers of visibility, has not led to a single, defined point. It has unfolded in moments, in transitions, in quiet adjustments that rarely announce themselves. And here, in a space where none of that is required, those moments do not fade. They remain, not as memories to be revisited, but as something integrated, something that continues without needing to be recalled. She sits at the table, her hands resting lightly against its surface. There is no script beneath them now, no pages to turn, no lines to trace. The absence is noticeable, but it does not create a void. Instead, it allows something else to emerge, not something new, but something that has always been present, waiting for the space to become quiet enough to be felt. The light outside shifts gradually, its tone changing as the day moves forward. The room responds without resistance, shadows lengthening, surfaces softening. She remains still, not because she's holding the moment, but because there is no need to move beyond it yet. The stillness does not ask for completion. It simply continues, open, undefined. There have been many roles, many moments of stepping into something that required a different way of being. Each one carried its own weight, its own structure, its own expectations, and each one was eventually released, allowed to dissolve into the space between what has been and what will come next. But what remains does not belong to any single role. It exists beyond them, beneath them, within the quiet continuity that connects each step. In the public eye, the narrative continues to build, new projects, new images, new interpretations of who she is and what she represents. These narratives shift, adapt, respond to what is visible. But here, in this space, none of that needs to be considered. There is no audience, no frame, no expectation to meet. Only the presence that remains when everything else is set aside. Her gaze moves slowly across the room, not searching, not analysing, simply noticing. The small details, the texture of the table, the way the light rests against the wall, the faint sound of something distant, each one exists without needing to be part of a larger meaning. And yet, together, they form something complete in their simplicity. As time passes, the boundary between moments becomes less defined. There is no clear transition from one state to another, only a gradual unfolding that does not draw attention to itself. The need to move forward, to reach the next point, feels less urgent here. What exists is enough, not in a final sense, but in a way that does not require immediate continuation. Eventually she stands, not because the moment has ended, but because it has shifted. The movement is gentle, unforced, carrying the same quiet awareness that has shaped each step throughout the day. She moves toward the door, her hand resting briefly on its surface before opening it, as if acknowledging the transition without needing to define it. Outside, the world resumes its fuller presence. Sounds, motion, the ongoing rhythm that does not pause. She steps into it without hesitation, not leaving anything behind, but carrying everything forward in a way that does not change its nature. The roles, the moments, the quiet spaces between them, all remain not as separate parts, but as something continuous. And as she moves through that space, there is no conclusion waiting, no final understanding that gathers everything into a single thought. There is only this ongoing presence, this quiet movement through moments that do not need to be fully explained. Somewhere within that movement, the same question remains, not asking to be answered, not seeking resolution, but simply existing, shaping the way each moment is held and the way each step continues into whatever comes next. The street outside carries a different rhythm, one that does not wait for cues or marks or quiet signals to begin. People pass without noticing, their movements shaped by their own directions, their own destinations. The air feels less contained, less arranged, and yet it holds its own kind of structure, a pattern that does not need to be rehearsed. She steps into it without hesitation, her pace adjusting naturally, not faster, not slower, just aligned with the flow that surrounds her. There is no camera here, no frame defining where the moment begins or ends, and yet something remains familiar. The awareness does not disappear simply because it is no longer required. It shifts, softens, becoming less focused on observation and more on presence. She walks past reflections in windows that briefly catch her image, though they do not hold it for long. Each one offers a glimpse, then releases it, leaving no trace behind. A cafe door opens nearby, the quiet sound of conversation drifting outward before settling back inside. She pauses for a moment, not because she intends to enter, but because something about the scene holds her attention. A table near the window, two people speaking softly, their expressions relaxed, unguarded. There is no performance there, no awareness of being seen, just a moment existing as it is, without needing to be shaped. She continues walking, the image dissolving behind her as easily as it appeared. There is something about these ordinary moments that feels grounding, not because they contrast with the world she moves through professionally, but because they exist independently of it. They do not ask for interpretation. They do not require understanding. They simply continue. Further along, the light begins to fade into the early tones of evening. Streetlights flicker on, one by one, their glow steady and unintrusive. The transition is gradual, almost unnoticeable unless one is paying close attention. She moves beneath that light, her shadow stretching briefly before settling into the rhythm of the street. There is no urgency in her movement, no destination that defines the pace. The day's work remains somewhere behind her, though not in a way that feels distant. It lingers, not as a sequence of events, but as a presence that has become part of the ongoing moment. The scenes, the roles, the quiet pauses between them, they do not need to be recalled to remain. They exist within her movement, shaping it in ways that are not visible, but quietly consistent. She reaches a quieter part of the street, where the sound softens, where fewer people pass, where the space feels slightly more open. There is a bench positioned beneath a tree, its surface worn in a way that suggests it has held many moments like this. She sits, not because she needs to rest, but because the pause feels natural, as though it belongs to the rhythm of the evening. The air is cooler now, carrying the faint scent of something distant, something that does not demand attention but remains present. She rests her hands lightly against the bench, her posture relaxed, her gaze unfixed. There is nothing to observe directly, nothing to focus on, and yet the moment does not feel empty. It feels complete in its simplicity. In this quiet, the distinction between the roles she has played and the person who carries them becomes less defined, not because they merge entirely, but because the need to separate them becomes less important. Each moment has contributed something, not as a collection of identities, but as a continuity that does not rely on clear boundaries. The public image, the narratives, the recognition. They remain, existing in spaces that are separate from this one. Here, there is no need to consider them. There is only the presence that remains when all of that is set aside. A presence that is not shaped by expectation, not defined by visibility, but simply exists as it is. Her gaze shifts slightly, catching the movement of leaves above her, their motion slow and steady in the evening air. The sound is soft, almost indistinct, blending into the background without interruption. She watches for a moment, not analysing, not attaching meaning, simply allowing the movement to be what it is. Time passes without clear markers. There is no beginning, no middle, no end to this moment. It continues, open and undefined, holding itself together without needing to be directed. And within that continuity, there is something steady, a quiet presence that does not change, even as everything around it moves. Eventually she stands, not because the moment has concluded, but because it has shifted into something else. The transition is gentle, unforced, carrying the same quiet awareness that has been present throughout the day. She steps away from the bench, her movement aligning once again with the rhythm of the street. As she walks, the environment changes subtly. Lights, sounds, the arrangement of spaces, but the continuity remains. Each step carries forward what has been, not as a memory, but as something integrated, something that does not need to be revisited to be understood. There is no final destination waiting, no clear endpoint that gathers everything into a single understanding. Instead, there is only this ongoing movement, this quiet continuation through moments that do not require resolution. And somewhere within that movement, the same quiet question remains. Not pressing, not demanding, but present, shaping the way each moment is held and the way each step continues into whatever comes next. The street grows quieter as the night settles in more fully, the earlier movement giving way to a slower, more measured rhythm. Storefront lights dim one by one, leaving behind only what is necessary to see without disturbing the calm that has formed. She continues walking without changing her pace, her steps steady, her presence unhurried, as if the night itself has set the tempo and she is simply aligned with it. There is a moment when she passes another window, this one darker, its reflection clearer against the absence of light behind it. For a brief second, her image appears more defined than before, not blended with the outside, but standing alone within the glass. She pauses, not out of intention, but because something in the stillness invites it. The reflection looks back without movement, holding its shape in a way that feels almost separate from her. She studies it, not critically, not searching for recognition, but noticing the quiet distance between what is seen and what remains unseen. The features are familiar, unchanged, yet they do not fully contain everything that has moved through the day. The roles, the moments, the pauses between them, none of it appears there, and still something of it remains, not visible, but present in a way that does not require confirmation. After a moment she moves on, the reflection dissolving as easily as it formed. The street opens slightly ahead, leading into a broader space where the buildings pull back and the sky becomes more visible. The night air feels cooler here, carrying a stillness that is not empty, but settled, as if everything has found its place for now. She slows slightly, not because she needs to, but because the space allows it. The absence of movement around her creates room for a different kind of attention, not focused on any one thing, but open, receptive, aware of the quiet continuity that has followed her from the set to this moment. It is not something that stands apart. It moves with her, unchanged by the shift in environment. In the distance, a faint sound, perhaps a passing car, perhaps something else, rises and fades without leaving a trace. The moment absorbs it without disruption, returning quickly to its steady stillness. She continues forward, her steps soft against the pavement, each one placed without urgency, without hesitation. There is no need to define what this moment is, no need to place it within a larger narrative. It exists on its own, complete in its simplicity, connected to what came before and what will follow, but not dependent on either. And within that completeness, there is a quiet clarity, not of understanding, but of presence. The work, the roles, the visibility, all remain part of her path, part of the movement that continues beyond this night. But here, none of it presses forward. None of it asks to be considered or explained. It exists as something integrated, something that does not separate itself from the quiet of this moment. She reaches another intersection, the path opening into multiple directions, each one equally still, equally unmarked. There is no sign indicating where to go, no structure guiding the choice. And yet, she does not pause for long. The movement continues, not because it must, but because it does. As she steps forward, the night holds its quiet presence, unchanged by her movement, unchanged by the passing of time. The world does not shift dramatically. It remains as it is, steady, open, allowing each moment to exist without interruption. And within that steady openness something remains, not something to be resolved, not something to be defined, but something that continues, quietly, beneath each step, beneath each pause, beneath each transition from one moment to the next. The question does not ask for an answer. It does not need one. It simply stays, not as a thought, but as a presence, not as something distant, but as something carried. And as the night continues and the path extends into whatever comes next, that presence moves with her, unchanged, unspoken, and always there, shaping the way each moment is held and the way each step continues into the quiet that follows. The night deepens almost without notice, its stillness becoming more complete as the last traces of movement fade into distance. The air holds a quiet that feels settled rather than empty, as though everything that needed to happen has already found its place within it. She continues forward, not searching for anything, not moving toward a defined end, but allowing each step to arrive naturally, without interruption. The street narrows again, guiding her into a quieter passage where the light is softer, more contained. A single lamp casts a steady glow, its circle of light resting gently on the ground without reaching too far beyond itself. She steps into it, her presence briefly defined by its boundaries, before moving through and out the other side. The transition is seamless, unmarked, leaving no sense of having entered or exited anything at all. There is a calm in this movement that does not depend on destination. Each step feels complete on its own, not leading towards something else, but existing fully as it happens. The world around her does not change dramatically, yet it continues to reveal itself in small ways. The texture of the pavement, the quiet shift of shadows, the faint movement of something unseen just beyond the edges of light. She pauses again, this time near a doorway that stands closed, its surface worn with time but intact. Her hand lifts slightly, not to open it, but to rest against it, feeling the coolness beneath her palm. The gesture is simple, unremarkable, yet it holds a quiet awareness, a recognition of something present without needing to move beyond it. Moments like this do not ask for continuation. They do not push forward or draw attention to themselves. They remain steady and complete, allowing whatever follows to emerge without urgency. She lowers her hand, not because the moment has ended, but because it has settled into something that no longer needs to be held. The path opens again, leading her into a wider space where the night feels less enclosed. The sky stretches above, darker now, its depth uninterrupted by the shapes that filled it earlier. She looks upward for a moment, not seeking anything specific, but allowing her gaze to rest within that openness. There is no need to define what she sees. The space itself is enough. Her journey through the day, through the roles, through the quiet transitions between them, does not resolve here. It does not gather into a final understanding or a clear conclusion. Instead, it continues, carried forward in the same quiet way it has always moved, unspoken, steady, present. The absence of structure does not create uncertainty. It creates space, and within that space something remains consistent, something that does not change with each new moment, each new environment. It is not fixed in a rigid sense, but it holds its own continuity, its own quiet rhythm. She resumes walking, her steps aligning once again with the gentle flow of the night. There is no indication of what comes next, no expectation shaping the direction. The movement itself is enough, the continuation of presence within a world that does not demand definition. The light shifts again, softer now, as though the night itself is easing into a deeper stillness. Sounds become more distant, less frequent, until they blend into the background without distinction. She moves through this quiet without altering it, her presence neither adding to nor subtracting from what already exists. There is no final scene waiting, no closing moment that gathers everything into a single point. Instead, there is only this, an ongoing passage through moments that do not require resolution, that do not seek to be concluded. And within that passage the same quiet presence remains, unchanged by time, unchanged by movement. It does not announce itself. It does not ask to be understood. It simply continues, carried forward with each step, felt in each pause, existing beneath everything that is seen and everything that is not. The night no longer feels like something separate from her movement, but something that has gently settled around it, shaping each step without resistance. The path continues, though it no longer seems to lead anywhere in particular. It simply exists, extending forward in quiet continuity. And within that continuation, something begins to shift, not outwardly, not in a way that can be seen directly, but in the space between what has been carried and what no longer needs to be held. There is a subtle awareness now, one that does not belong to any role she has stepped into, nor to any moment that has been observed. It emerges quietly, as if it has always been present but only now finds room to be noticed. The movement slows slightly, not in hesitation, but in recognition of that space. A space where nothing needs to be performed, nothing needs to be shaped into something else. A dim reflection appears again in a glass surface as she passes, but this time she does not pause. The image follows her briefly, then fades, unable to keep pace with the movement that continues forward. And in that fading, there is no sense of loss, only a quiet acknowledgement that what is seen does not need to remain for what is felt to continue. The distance between what has been performed and what remains begins to take form, not as a separation, but as a space that allows both to exist without merging entirely. The roles she has inhabited do not disappear. They linger, but lightly, like impressions that no longer need to define the surface they once shaped. Her steps carry forward through that space, unaltered, steady. There is no effort to close the distance, no attempt to bring everything into alignment. Instead, there is a quiet acceptance of its presence, the understanding that not everything needs to be resolved in order to remain whole. The street widens once more, though it no longer feels like a transition. The changes in space no longer shift her awareness in the same way. What was once defined by movement through different environments now feels continuous, as though each place is simply another variation of the same quiet presence. She pauses again, but not because something calls her to stop. It is a pause that arises naturally, without intention, as if the movement itself has reached a point where stillness belongs just as much as motion. Her hands rest at her sides, relaxed, unoccupied, holding nothing, needing nothing. There is no mirror here, no reflection to consider, no surface that returns an image. And yet the absence of reflection does not create uncertainty. It creates space. Space where what remains does not need to be seen to be understood in its quiet way. The roles, the scenes, the voices, the carefully shaped moments, they exist somewhere behind, but not as something separate. They are part of the same continuity, but they no longer stand at the centre. What remains does not shift with them. It does not adapt or transform in the same visible way. It simply continues. A faint sound passes again, distant and indistinct, dissolving almost as soon as it appears. The night holds it briefly, then releases it without interruption. She listens, but not actively. The sound does not demand attention. It simply passes through the same space she occupies, leaving nothing altered. There is a sense now that the movement has become less about direction and more about presence. Each step does not lead somewhere new, but returns to the same quiet centre that has been there all along. The difference is not in the path, but in the awareness of it. She resumes walking, though the pace remains unchanged. There is no need to move faster, no reason to slow further. The rhythm has settled into something that does not require adjustment. It exists on its own, steady, continuous, unaffected by what surrounds it. And within that steady movement the distance deepens, not as something to cross, but as something to hold. A space where what has been performed and what remains can exist without needing to meet. A space that does not divide, but allows each to be what it is. The night grows quieter still, though it is difficult to say when that change occurred. There is no clear point where sound faded or stillness increased. It simply is. And within that stillness something becomes clearer, not as an answer, but as a presence that no longer shifts or searches. She steps into another pool of light, then out again, the transition as seamless as before. The light does not define her, and its absence does not remove anything. It is simply part of the space, part of the movement, part of the continuity that carries forward without interruption. Eventually the path becomes less visible, not because it ends, but because it no longer needs to be followed in the same way. The distinction between where she walks and where she has been begins to dissolve. There is only movement now, and the quiet presence within it. She slows once more, not stopping entirely, but allowing the movement to soften further, to settle into something that feels less like walking and more like simply being within the moment. Her gaze lifts slightly, not toward anything specific, but into the openness that surrounds her. And in that openness, the distance no longer feels like something separate. It becomes part of the same quiet presence, part of the same continuity that has carried her through each moment. It does not ask to be closed. It does not seek resolution. It simply remains. The light fades a little more, the edges of the world softening into something less defined. There is no final image, no closing frame that gathers everything into a single point. Instead, there is only this, an ongoing stillness, a quiet continuation that does not end. Her movement slows until it no longer feels like movement at all. The distinction between step and pause disappears, leaving only presence, steady, unspoken, unchanged. And within that presence, when everything else has faded, when the lights have dimmed and the roles have softened into memory, something remains. Not as a conclusion, not as an answer, but as something that stays, quiet, unresolved, and always there, shaping the silence long after the moment has passed. The night does not end so much as it becomes softer, its edges dissolving into something that feels less like time passing and more like time settling. The path beneath her feet is no longer something she follows, but something that simply exists as part of the moment she occupies. There is no sense of moving forward or arriving anywhere. There is only a quiet continuation, steady and unbroken. A faint glow begins to form at the edge of the sky. Not yet morning, but something close to it. The darkness does not resist it. It allows the change without conflict, without urgency. She stands within that transition, her presence unchanged, her movement paused in a way that does not feel like stopping. It feels like being held gently within the space between what was and what is about to become. There are no roles here, no scenes waiting to begin, no lines to remember or deliver. The distance that once existed between performance and presence has settled into something quieter now. It is no longer something to notice or hold. It has become part of the same stillness, part of the same continuity that has followed her through each moment without interruption. She breathes in slowly, not deeply, not with intention, just enough to feel the air as it moves. It carries no weight, no expectation. It simply passes through, as everything else has, unmarked, unchanged. Her hands remain still at her sides, unoccupied, as if they no longer reach for anything beyond the moment itself. The light grows slightly, touching the edges of buildings, softening the shapes that once felt more defined. The world begins to reappear, but gently, without breaking the quiet that has formed. She does not turn toward it. She does not move to meet it. She remains where she is, allowing the change to exist without needing to respond. There is nothing left to transition from, nothing left to return to. The roles have faded into something that no longer separates from what remains. They exist, but they no longer define. They no longer shape the movement in the same way. What remains is simpler, quieter, not because it has been reduced, but because it no longer needs to hold anything beyond itself. The question that has moved quietly through each moment does not rise now. It does not ask, does not press forward. It has settled into the same stillness, no longer distinct from the presence it once shaped. It is not gone. It is simply no longer separate. She takes a step, though it does not feel like movement. It feels like continuation, like the same quiet presence extending into another moment without interruption. The ground beneath her does not change. The space around her does not shift. And yet, something continues gently without needing to be noticed. The light becomes softer still, spreading slowly, filling the spaces that the night once held. But it does not replace the stillness. It carries it forward, allowing it to remain within the new shape of the moment. There is no contrast, no separation between what was and what is. There is only continuity. She does not look back. There is nothing behind her that feels left or lost. Everything that has been is already part of what remains. The set, the roles, the reflections, the quiet pauses between them, they have all settled into something that does not need to be revisited. Her movement slows again until it becomes stillness once more. The step she has taken does not lead into another. It simply exists, complete in itself without requiring continuation. And in that stillness there is no absence. There is only presence, steady and unchanging. The world begins to wake in the distance, faint sounds returning, subtle shifts in the air, but they do not disturb the quiet that remains here. They exist alongside it, not replacing it, not interrupting it, just another layer within the same continuity. And within that continuity, nothing asks to be resolved, nothing asks to be defined, nothing asks to be finished. There is no final moment, no closing scene, only this quiet presence, extending beyond the boundaries of what has been told, beyond the shape of any role or identity. And as the light continues to grow, and the night softens into something new, that presence remains, unchanged, unspoken, always there.